You can do Nayania Baria, Nayania Manania, Manania. You can do Nayania Baria, Nayania Manania, Manania.
From the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, this is the A Cuppa and a Yarn podcast.
Stan Grant, welcome to A Cuppa and a Yarn.
Good, Michelle. Good to be here.
Now, I've got to start, as we always do.
Yeah.
Who's your mob?
Well, my dad's Wiradjuri. I always consider myself Wiradjuri, but my mum's Gamilaroi, and I'm, deeply connected there. And I also have connections to La Perouse in the South Coast through the Foster family, which are a big family there. And my great-grandfather was a Foster. He was originally from around La Perouse, and this is going back to the middle of the 1800s. When he was a little boy, they rounded up all the blackfellas who were living around Circular Quay. They were living in the boat shed at Circular Quay. And they wanted to get rid of them. So they rounded them up and sent them out west. And he then lived on a mission out near Darlington Point, and then married one of the Nadens, a Wiradjuri woman, and had my great-grandmother. So I've connected to South Coast and La Perouse through the Foster family, and then Gamilaroi through my mum, and Wiradjuri through my dad, and, really, really deeply connected to Wiradjuri country. It's a massive, massive family.
And you were born in Griffith, is that right?
Yeah, Griffith in 1963. We moved around a lot. Griffith was always a sort of spiritual home, I think, in a sense. There was a mission there, Three Ways Reserve on the outskirts of town. And that was always where we'd sort of come back to all the time. And had a very, very big family. But we moved around a lot. I was born in Griffith. My sister was born in Gilgandra. My brother was born in Nyngan. Another brother was born in Merriwa. And Dad was a sawmiller. It was pretty itinerant lifestyle. So we just moved.
Yeah, sounds like my family.
Yeah, we moved. I mean, it had good and bad. It meant that I was always surrounded by family. Because wherever we were, there were big mobs.
Yeah.
And we were always travelling with lots of my grandfather and my uncles and aunties and cousins, and we were all just travelling around together. So we'd pitch up to places and we'd stay there for a while and we'd move on. But what it meant was that I didn't really go to school till I was about 14 because I started school, but I'd leave and stop and start, and I'd go for a couple of weeks and then we'd move, and I'd miss out school for a few months and I'd pick it up somewhere else and I'd do a few more weeks or a couple of months and then we'd move again. So by the time I was into high school, I think I'd been to about 14 different schools. So I had no continuity of education, but I had a fantastic
life education
and a fantastic experience of growing up primarily on my own country and amongst my own people.
So with that, and certainly at that time, and I mean, you're not an old fellow or whatever, what was the situation with school authorities sort of saying, or didn't they care if a young Aboriginal boy wasn't going to school?
I was never around long enough to know what they thought, to be honest.
Or you were gone too fast for them to catch up?
I do know the welfare officers would come around, occasionally when we were at school. And I have clear memories of being called out of class and, taken up to the principal's office and interrogated by welfare officers, asking questions about my family and what we had for dinner the night before, and checking my ears and, all this sort of stuff, and check my lunchbox if I had food, to eat. I clearly remember that, and I clearly remember a real sense of dread about the threat of welfare officers coming and taking you, because it had happened in other parts of my extended family, and my mother was always warning us about that. And some of her brothers and sisters were taken away to the homes, particularly because her mother was white and her father was Aboriginal, so the kids who were lighter skinned were taken away. And so I was very aware of that, and I think it was part of my mother and father's motivation really in continuing to move, was to avoid the clutches of authorities. And I know my dad really, really rebelled against the idea of having government control in our lives. He'd seen what had happened in his own family, and he wasn't going to have that happen to us. So we sort of stayed one step ahead, I think, moving around so much. I do remember though, when I got to high school and I was about just turning 15, there were a group of us, Aboriginal kids, some of my cousins and friends, and we were called up to the principal's office, and he said, well, you're about to get to the age when you're no longer legally required to come to school, so it's better that you leave. And his words to which I've never forgotten were, you will amount to nothing, so there's no point coming here.
How old were you?
15, just
Wow.
turning 15, which was the age at which you no longer legally had to attend school. So they wanted us out of there. Luckily, my dad got a job in Canberra, and we moved again. And that was a bit of a turning point, because I sort of went from being in a school where a lot of other Aboriginal kids to just me and my sister being the only ones, which was tough in some respects, and in others it gave me a bit of cover. I was able to sort of duck my head down and slide through, the last few years of school without getting a lot of crap from a lot of the teachers. They didn't care what I did, but they weren't actively trying to impede me like it was in other schools. So that was a bit of a critical moment for me.
So with that move to Canberra, you had a sort of a patchy educative start until around the age of 14.
Yeah.
So how did you make up for that, or you just kept running? Because it seems like you finished school and
because I was really smart.
yeah.
I mean that
And you just went.
and we should say this. Our people need to know how smart we are,
and we need to say it.
I was smarter than everybody else. I was always smarter than everybody else. I read, just because I wasn't going to school didn't mean I wasn't reading, and I was reading voraciously from the age. Mum says I could read from the age of 3. I was reading before I ever went to school. When I was 8 or 9 years old, Mum would bring home any books she found. We always got stuff from the second-hand clothes stores, St Vincent's de Paul and Smith Family and stuff. And so whenever she got clothes, there were usually books thrown away in book bins and things. And she'd bring home books. You get them for whatever cost and just bring them home. And meant that from an early age I was exposed to a whole range of things. Like I was reading Ernest Hemingway and Steinbeck, Mark Twain. I was reading Greek mythology. I remember clearly getting for my about 9th or 10th birthday a book on Greek myths. And, I was fascinated with these things, fascinated by the world, and I read and read and read, and I watched the news all the time. I was really actively engaged. So when we got to settle down in one place, it wasn't hard to catch up. There were big gaps in my education. The things that needed continuity of education were really difficult, like maths and then science-based subjects that required maths, because maths is an iterative process, you work through the stages of learning, and if you miss those fundamentals, it's really difficult to catch up. But I asked Mum and Dad to get me a tutor who came a couple of nights a week, and he tutored me in maths so that I would get through school. And, I didn't want to be, I didn't want other people to finish ahead of me in school if I knew I was smarter than them. So I never really had a problem, once I got there and put my head down. And there were things that I could do that came really naturally to me, and being able to write, being able to think clearly, being able to absorb lots of information and being able to recall lots of information, to sit down and do exams and have, really strong recall and memory. They were second nature to me. So it really wasn't hard.
How different then was Canberra to the life, apart from the obvious, the life that you left behind? Because you were, as you said, in your travels, mob to mob to mob, and being static is different.
It was a critical time because, the sort of political movement had really ratcheted up during the early 1970s and post-tent embassy and stuff. After the 67 referendum, and then the embassy in 72, and it's just 77, 78 by the time I'm turning up there. And these things are really strong. There's a Department of Aboriginal Affairs. There are Aboriginal people going to universities. There were ideas that we were being exposed to, and many members of my family were doing that. And when we moved, suddenly a whole lot of other mob moved over as well. So we were then, surrounded by families. So there was quite a thriving community, and it made me aware that there was a world bigger than my own, and that I could have access to that world. and that there were Aboriginal people who were beating a path that I could follow. So it was a good experience, really.
So some of those things that you knew about yourself, recall, thinking clearly, writing, etc. Where did that start to transition throughout your teenage years into ultimately, becoming a journalist?
It was reading,
It was reading.
It was just reading. Then being exposed in my teens to a lot of black writers. When Kevin Gilbert, who's related to me actually, my dad's side, who'd written really significant books like, Because a White Man Will Never Do It, and then opening up to black American writers like James Baldwin, who had a critical sort of influence on me once I'd sort of stumbled across books like Go Tell It on the Mountain, and this when I saw black people writing about stories that in some way reflected my own. A very different country, different experience, but in some ways they connected and they reflected part of my own world. And so that really sort of inspired me as well. And it was that love of reading and a natural gift for writing. I'd never found writing a difficult thing. In fact, I find it a really life-affirming thing. And my mother used to write stories all the time. She'd write poetry, she'd write short stories. Just, someone who barely went to high school. But she would sit and write poetry. She would sit and write short stories. She'd tell us stories all the time. We're great storytellers, My dad's grandfather, my great-grandfather, he was known as the storyteller. He lived many different places. One of the places he lived was at Bulgandra Mine Mission in Peak Hill. And there's a list of everyone who lived on the mission. And it came to him and it said, Bill Grant, in brackets, the storyteller. That was his job. He told stories. So that's in my DNA, to tell stories, to write. It's as easy for me as breathing. It's just not difficult at all.
So across those years, the teen years, with not having an issue with making up any of that Western type of education, how was it tracking along at home? I mean, you've got quite a few siblings. Any memories you care to share about brothers and sisters? Anything funny or?
Oh well, our life was hilarious. I mean, our entire life was. We were like the hillbillies, really. We were just moving around, and so many funny stories. My grandfather was living with us, and he was a really, really funny man. And you'd hear him. He'd go out every week. He'd wait for his pension. So he'd sit around and he'd be sitting out on the front step waiting for the postman to come. If the postman was running late, he'd always say to me, "You get on your bike and you go round and see if you can find this postman and get the cheque off him. I need to get down to the bank, cash his cheque." And so I'd be pedalling around trying to find the postman. And if the cheque was ever late, he'd march down the street, go into the post office and demand to know where his cheque was, and if they didn't have it, he'd go, "Well, it's all right for you. Your white guts are full. What about me? What about the old black fella? What do I do?" So he'd always be like this. When the pension cheque did come, he'd always take me down. We'd get he'd buy me an ice cream, then he'd go off to the pub and blow the lot, And then I'd wait up for him at night. I'd be waiting there for him, and you'd hear him coming, and he'd stumble in and smack. We lived in this sort of tin house, He'd stumble against the wall, and you'd hear this crash and bang, and he'd be singing at the top of his voice. Usually, that song, "Please Release Me," release me, let me go.
Let me go.
Yeah, and so he'd be singing that, and I'd know that Pa was home. I'd go out and I'd pick him up, and any money that he'd scattered all over the ground, I'd pick up and I'd hold it for him. Wait a couple of days, and he'd come out and wondering where his money was, and I'd have all this stashed away. Give to him after a couple of days when he'd sort of saved it up. So we're always doing stuff like that, and he used to, one of the jobs he used to have was, he'd go around. We used to have the outside toilets, the old pit. Mm-hmm. Oh, so you'd have a tin, big drum in there, and he used to go around. He'd have to collect it. So pick it up, throw it in the thing. One day he was out and he was mowing a lawn, and they didn't see where it was boarded over. He went straight through it and landed in the middle of this.
Oh no!
So he's there, and his cousin one of my uncles is there and had to sort of drag him out. And my uncle's a really skinny little bloke and my grandfather's quite a solid bloke. And he's trying to drag him out of this, and my grandfather said to me, he said, I was there and I could smell this and I was sinking ever further. And he said, I kept thinking to myself, well, you've worked in shit all your life, now you're going to die in shit. He was a very, very funny old man. But, we always, life was just an adventure for us, not being in one place at the one time. And when I think about my life now, it was like something out of a Tom Sawyer book, Huckleberry Finn, I'd be, I remember one year I broke my arm, I went off a bike going down a hill and got strung up on a barbed wire fence, had to cut all the barbed wire off, send me to the hospital to get it all attached, detached, and getting tetanus shots to get rid of the potential tetanus from the barbed wire. Another time my uncle had these bees and he used to say to me, don't go near the beehive. As soon as his back was turned, I went down the beehive, lifted it up, and all the bees went up underneath my t-shirt. And all my dad and my uncle saw was me running around screaming at the top of my voice. They had to chase after me, get me down, rip the shirt off, and I was just stung all across my stomach.
Stan.
Taken to hospital, I had to have all the little stings taken out, and it was just a crazy life of adventure and being on the road and being surrounded by your family. And our families are really funny people. They're always telling jokes, and life is, and I didn't take life too seriously.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it was good.
Wonderful. I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who can talk with such fondness about having 100 bees under your t-shirt.
Oh, well, it was just part of the adventure of life, and and being poor, as we were, like really, really poor, and being black. I mean, there was always that tension between, we knew we were different. We knew that people looked down on us, white people, that we were never, the equality and the other people enjoyed wasn't for us. But in our own life, in our own world, amongst our own mob, we were just human beings, and and we loved life, and people were very funny, and we had great adventures. Yeah.
So you stayed in Canberra. You were in Canberra for a while. You finished school there. What happened after that?
Well, nothing really. I mean, I didn't have any ambition because no one in my family had ever done anything in
Serious?
life.
Okay.
No one had ever been to university or anything like that. That was unthinkable. And an uncle of mine had a job at the Institute of Aboriginal Studies. And my life's been a sort of collection of really fortuitous moments, and this was one of them, probably the most critical one. And my uncle was a janitor there, and I got a job there delivering mail. So I would just go to the mail room, get all the internal mail, go around, drop it into people's offices. Then I'd go down to the library in the afternoon and I would be able to photocopy and whatever they needed doing. It's just a little menial job and that was all I aspired to. I didn't have any ambitions. It had always been in the back of my mind that I would like to be involved in news or journalism somehow, but I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea how to go about that. And it was through working there that I met other Aboriginal people who were older than me, but still young enough, So I was 17, 18, they would have been in their late 20s, early 30s. And they were working there as research officers, studying at the university. And one of them in particular was Marcia Langton. And Marcia pulled me aside one day in the library and she called me over and she said, listen, what do you want to do with your life? And I had no idea, And she said, you finished school, you're a smart kid, you've got more to offer than this, and you owe your parents more than this. They haven't sacrificed to give you the opportunities for you to waste it away. And she sort of really encouraged me to go to university and put me in contact with people who could facilitate that. And next thing you know, I applied, got into university, and next year went off and started studying, and that led really quickly to journalism cadetship, into the press gallery as a political reporter, overseas as a foreign correspondent, and then I was away. You know, I mean, my life, things happened. You know, I went from being 17 and delivering mail with no ambition in life, had no idea what I wanted to do, to, at the age of 27, fronting a national current affairs program for Channel 7. 10 years. That's just insane. That's insane. But that's how quickly things moved in my life once I found that path. And the path, I've always found this. It's not anything that I do, it's what my ancestors do for me. You know, it's the spirits of my ancestors that guide me, and they point me in directions, and they create connections, and they put me in touch with people who are going to open doors to send me. I've been on a mission for them. They've been pushing me in the direction I need to go. And when I've followed that path, when I've listened to the voices of my ancestors, who I'm hearing all the time, when I do that, the right things happen. Not good things or the most successful things, but the right things happen. When I don't do that, it sets up a tension in my life that becomes unlivable. So I'm here because of my ancestors. They put me there. They put me on that path. They put me in that room with Marcia. They put me in that university. They put me on the road to journalism. I just had to follow the path and work hard.
I just want to go back to Marcia Langton, if I could.
Yeah.
You know, your ancestors putting you in the room with her. Do you think Marcia was... I mean, she was certainly part of that whole dynamic too,
Yeah.
because I actually do find that about her. She's pretty amazing with being on the money and helping set people in directions.
She's got a great generosity of spirit, and she's a great mentor, and she's a courageous woman. And maybe she saw something in me. Well, clearly she did.
You did, yeah.
And she thought that was worth nurturing and encouraging. But there's always bigger forces at play in your life, you know. And for us, being from this country, that connects us so deeply to a sense of who we are and our purpose in life, that it's no mystery to me that things happen in the way that they do. These things come from being connected deeply to your sense of place and the sense of who you are and where you belong. And then our ancestors make it very easy for us after that. And I've found that at every step of the way in my life, that's happened.
We speak a lot about, particularly for people who are not living on country, who are living at home, how wonderful it always is and how solidifying it is when you do go home. So having spent a life, as you were saying, the Aboriginal version of Huckleberry Finn, Canberra, and then that 10 years, and you're off and you're travelling all over the world. How did you find it was to retain that connection with who you are on a deep level when you're...
it was never a problem.
How did you do that?
I didn't even have to think about it. It wasn't a process of doing anything. It was just a process of being who I was. No matter where I was in the world, I was always me. I was always the same kid who lived in those towns. I was always a Wiradjuri, Gamaroi, Dharawal person. That's what I am. That was never a tension. And I lived overseas for 18 years. Lived everywhere and travelled more than 80 countries. And no matter where I was me. I was who I was. And when I met other people, they'd talk about that, and I'd explain to them where I was from, what my ancestry was, what my connection is. And that was part of the journey. That was the journey I had to do to prepare me for the time when I would come back. And again, when I was away, I would come back all the time, spend time back out on country and reconnect, and also get that energy that we need from being on our own place that you can't get from anywhere else. Absolutely. And so I was always being replenished by dipping back in and out, even though I was living away. And then eventually, you know, when I felt that I had to come home, when the moment I got back, it opened up so many doors. I helped launch national Indigenous television for them. You know, the first broadcast I presented from Alice Springs on the launch of the network. You know, I wrote Talking to My Country, which became a best-selling book. It led to the documentary on Adam Goodes. I've written 5 books in the last 4 years. I'm working on another film. I'm writing a novel and another book right now. And again, what I'd done outside had prepared me for that. And when I came back, when whatever spirits were there that were calling me back felt it was the right time to come back, it coincided with a critical time in Australia's political journey that allowed me to find a place in that and find a voice in that, and to speak that voice for my own people, particularly Wiradjuri people.
Did you ever find along that journey, and then where are we now, 2020? Let's say perhaps not in the last decade.
Yeah.
Okay, where especially when you were away, and even when you were here, I know what your answer's going to be, but I've got to ask. Pretty much, where you found that people looked at you differently, but not in a good way because you were Wiradjuri.
Listen. White people don't know who we are. They've got no idea. They've got no idea. They don't even know how to begin to understand what it is to be Indigenous. And they can't help constantly telling us what's good for us and who we are and defining us. And they view us with skepticism. So one of the things that they find really difficult to deal with is the idea of success and being an Aboriginal person and being successful. Suddenly you become less Aboriginal to them. So they'd often say things to me like, oh, but you're different to the others, or you're not like them. You know, not even realising that they don't even know who they are, who are the them that they talk about. You know, they make these grand assumptions about us. So I went from being someone that they wanted to kick out of school because I was black, to someone who was successful and was then told that you're not black because you're too successful.
Yeah.
White people have got no idea. So you're always grappling with that tension and that inherent racism that we have to navigate all the time because we are a minority. You know, we don't enjoy, you know, the benefits and the privileges of being a majority in this land. And the culture, the rules, they're set by white people. And we have to fit into those rules to survive. So how do we do that and create something for ourselves? But I was always really inspired by, as I said before, great writers, great thinkers. I remember something James Baldwin once said. He said, you know, I've spent a lifetime watching white people and outsmarting them in order to survive. And that's what I did. I watched them and I outsmarted them. I saw the way they worked. I went into journalism. There were no Aboriginal people there. They were all white. I watched them and I thought, you're not smarter than me. You don't know more than me. You're not magical. Whiteness doesn't give you special powers. I'm going to be smarter than you. I'm going to work harder than you. I'm going to be better than you. And I was. And it opened the doors and I went around the world. And I'm still, to this day, refusing to allow them to define who I am. I'll do whatever I want to do. I will read whatever I want. I will write whatever I want. I will travel wherever I want. I will work wherever I want. And I will never allow them to define me or to limit me in any way. And that drives them mad. That drives white people insane that they can't control us. But that's what working hard and being successful, in inverted commas, in their eyes, gives you in a sense. It gives you a ticket to ride. You know, you're in there. You've paid your entrance fee. Now you can run the game. That's what we've got to do. We've got to be smart enough to run the game and not allow them to tell us who we are. And
not appease them either. And I'm
not appease them.
I'm harking to, and I know I'm skipping ahead to this year, an opinion piece you actually wrote this year following the High Court decision on the two.
You know, the High Court decision in the Love case, as it's known.
The Love and Toms,
It really involved a case of 2 Aboriginal men who were facing deportation for crimes they'd committed here, who were not Australian citizens but were Indigenous. and the High Court was asked to rule on whether they could be deported. And it was a landmark ruling because it, following on from the Mabo decision, it basically, again, tries to grapple with what is the extent of and limits of Aboriginal sovereignty. And that's what it's really about. The dissenting opinions in the High Court couldn't get on board with the majority because they saw it as too close to a recognition of Aboriginal sovereignty. But what it's really saying is, and in this case, the plaintiffs won. The ruling was that they could not be deported because being Indigenous to this land gives you a connection to it that is greater than citizenship. And so it is. Yes, it should be greater than citizenship. This is our land. The imposition of British law, the imposition of white rule, of occupation and invasion does not remove the fact that this is our land. And so the courts have invented a new idea about belonging and belongers and what legal rights that entails. And so I wrote an article for the Sydney Morning Herald exploring that idea and saying, when we say always was, always will be Aboriginal land and sovereignty never ceded, that means something. We're not just speaking out loud. Don't ask us to welcome you to country unless you also acknowledge that this is our country. And so when I see white people resisting these ideas, saying things like, it's giving Aboriginal people rights that we don't have, I say, yes, it does. We do have rights that you don't have. You're not Indigenous. This is our land. You live here because you invaded it. You massacred people. You live here because you stole it. Don't expect us to give up our rights because you stole the country from us. We're still here. And so the idea that we should appease whiteness to achieve the recognition of our rights is just abhorrent to me. Why on earth should we be pleading with the white power structures to recognise us, to recognise us in the Constitution on anything less than our terms? And as we've been reminded time and time again, no government in Australia of any persuasion has ever been prepared to recognise us in our terms and to allow us to fulfil our destiny in this land. No government has ever recognised the inherent sovereignty of Aboriginal people in this land. The courts have taken them right up to the line with Mabo and with the recent decision, but no government has grasped that idea. They are continually trying to thwart our ambitions, to assimilate us, and to beat us into compromised positions that don't allow for the fulfilment of the extent of our self-determination and our rights in this country. And anything that appeases that white supremacy is a betrayal of who we are and our ancestry. And I really believe that. I think we need to hold absolutely firm, and we need to make sure that any recognition of our rights does not in any way abrogate our responsibilities to our ancestors and does not in any way diminish our claims as the rightful owners of this land. Anything less is abhorrent to me. So I'm really strong on this idea. We don't have to appease white people to allow white people to see the truthfulness and of our claim to our rights in our own country. And I think white people can get on board with the idea. I think it's fine. I think we can bring them to our side, but we don't bring them to our side by bending to them or bending to government. We need to be partners in Australia, not subjects.
You're listening to A Cuppa and a Yarn. I'm speaking with Stan Grant, and we're talking about the recent in 2020 High Court decision regarding two young Aboriginal men who the court determined that basically, well, I said that day, Stan, when I had a look at the initial ruling before the details were released, Aboriginality trumps citizenship.
Yeah, it does.
that was how I saw it.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
And that's what Justice Edelman fundamentally said. He said that, writing for the majority, he said that Indigenous people have a connection and belong to this land in a way that cannot be legislated away. Cannot be legislated away. Beyond the reach of the law So, yes, our rights, our place, our belonging is greater than the idea of citizenship. And so it should be. And Australia should have no problem in incorporating that idea into what Australia is. If you resist that, what are you really saying to us? You hear these people saying, we shouldn't have race in the Constitution. Well, race has always been the Constitution. Australia was founded on the racist idea that this was terra nullius.
And people say, we're all the same. We
Well,
should
we're
all
not
be
all
the
the
same.
same.
No, we're not, are we?
And the only thing, it's not that they don't want race in the Constitution, they don't want our race in the Constitution. I mean, I'm not big on race talk because I think race is just, race is a myth in some respects, We're not a race of people, we're a human race of people. When Aboriginal people are not a race of people, we are the people of this land. We are a people, an Indigenous peoples of this land. That's what we are. It's a furphy, this. It's what the right wing of Australia uses constantly to muddy the waters. There's talk about race, and we shouldn't have race in the Constitution. Well, race has always been in the Constitution. There's always been a race power in the Constitution that's been used against us. And now for them to talk about not putting race in, it isn't race they have a problem with, it's our race they have a problem with. And we need to be smart enough to understand their arguments and to rebut their arguments. But at the end of the day, the highest court in this land ruled in our favour, so, live with it.
And with that, you were saying we've got to be smart enough, we have to be able to rebut it. I mean, there's a lot of our people in our communities, etc. And was it your father who's teaching Wiradjuri?
Yeah.
Yes. You were saying, I like in the piece that you wrote that that decision that day was probably not going to matter a whole lot to him.
I wouldn't give it a second thought. Dad doesn't need Australia to recognise him.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be in the Australian Constitution. He's a Wiradjuri man. He knows where he stands. He speaks his language. He practices his culture. He lives on his country. Who needs to tell him who he is? Doesn't need Scott Morrison to come along and tell him who he is. He doesn't need Ken Wyatt to do anything for him. Just go away. Get out of his life. Let us get on with our lives, Our communities need to take charge of our communities. We need to say what it means to be a Wiradjuri person or a Gummaroid person, a Ngarrindjeri person, whatever that may be. We need to determine that, not anyone else. As far as Dad's concerned, get out of my life. Let me look after what is important to me. Let our people look after what's important to us. There is a need to have government in our lives because they're they are the people who provide the services. They collect the taxation money, but they're about service delivery. They're about streamlining services to make sure that we get the best access to the resources that we deserve. Just like every other Australian, we deserve access to resources. That's their job. Their job is not to tell us who we are. Their job is not to lecture us. Their job is not to get involved in our lives and our culture and in our bedrooms and tell us whether we keep our kids. And that's not their job. They take in tax money, they distribute tax money, they deliver services. That's what they do. And so my dad, he's not going to think about what the High Court does or what the Parliament does or whether we should have constitutional recognition or whatever. He knows who he is. He doesn't need anyone else to tell him at all where he belongs and who he is. And that's true for a lot of our people.
That's right. In community, working in community, working with community.
We know who we are. Ken Wyatt comes to Wiradjuri country. He's not the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. He's just a blackfellow, and he's not a blackfellow from our country either.
Yeah.
So, know your place, right? He doesn't go there and tell my father anything.
I bet he doesn't.
No, and he wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
So, they are there to provide for us. We elect our governments to provide for us as Australians. Anything other than that, we'll take care of.
Now, you were mentioning a few minutes ago books you've written.
Yeah.
One's in the offing. Can you talk about it?
I don't want to talk about that.
No spoilers?
I don't want to give too much away, but it's a novel I've been thinking about for a long time, which deals with the really big questions of Australia and race and belonging and history, and it encompasses everything from the beginning, when the first invasion, to now, it's fun. It's fun to write. So I should have that done by the end of the year if I get my head down. There's another book I'm writing. It's a Writers on Writers series. and you choose a writer and you get to write about some of their work. So I've chosen Tom Keneally,
nice.
and I'm writing about the chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, and looking at how he wrote that and what it tells us about Australia, and so I'm working on that, and then so I've got those two, and then there's another book that I've got in the planning after that, and there's a film that we're working on at the moment on Pemulwuy, a feature film.
Nice.
That we're pretty much advanced on. We've almost locked off on the script. Philip Noyce, the Australian director, who did Rabbit Proof Fence, he and I are co-executive producers, and so I'm overseeing, with Philip and some of the other producers, the scripts, and we'll get into casting and start shooting that towards the end of the year. So it's busy, and I'm working. I've got some other stuff planned in television I want to do, and I'm also working for Charles Sturt University. Vice Chancellor's chair there, and I'm interested in working on issues of belonging, what it is to belong. I'm really sort of interested in the philosophical ideas of identity and belonging and who we are and how we express that and how we build our own nations. What does it mean to be Wiradjuri, and how do we build the idea of a Wiradjuri nation? I'm interested in those things, and thankfully through academic work with Charles Sturt I can pursue some of those things.
That's fantastic. So is it Charles Sturt, Bathurst, Wagga?
Wagga. But I work across all of them,
Yeah.
It's a great university. They work with my dad on his language course. That's the only postgraduate Indigenous language studies course at any university in Australia. Postgraduate in diploma in Wiradjuri studies. And my dad helped set that up. And he initially taught that. He stepped back, and he's got a whole lot of other people teaching it now. And and so there's, they approached me some time ago to take on a role as professor there and to work with them across issues of identity and belonging and nationhood. And as it's on Wiradjuri land, that's
fantastic.
That's all I want to focus on. People in Queensland and Northern Territory, Western Australia, that's their business. They look after their community. I wouldn't go up there and tell them what to do. I'm interested in my people, where I'm from, what matters to me. If we all take care of that, we'll be a lot healthier than running around telling everybody else what's good for them.
So you've got a bit happening.
Yeah, lots.
Yeah, and I know your kids are all grown now and doing quite well. So what does the next year look like for you?
The next year?
Yeah.
Well, I want to help set up this institute with Charles Sturt University, which is sort of a think tank with them, which will look at issues of identity and belonging and nationhood. A lot more writing. I write regularly for the Sydney Morning Herald. I write regularly for the ABC. There's a series that the ABC's working with me on that I want to get locked in over the next year. We want to advance on this Pemulwuy film, so we want to start shooting that over the next year. And I should have 2 books published by this time next year as well.
Just a couple of things, eh?
Yeah. Well, we're here for a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And we're not here to waste our time. I'm not here to sit around watching rubbish on television, or I'm here to do work. I'm here to do work that my ancestors want me to do. And I want to spend a lot more time in my own country too. So I'm looking at trying to spend at least 50% of my time back out on country to do all my writing and be connected to that. And then when I need to be in Sydney, I'll be in Sydney. So I'm in a sort of fortunate time in my life when we can have a place in Sydney and we can buy a place in the country and we can move between both, and I can spend as much time out there as I possibly can.
In your work with identity and belonging, would you possibly consider what that may mean for Aboriginal people who are not living on country? And I just speak as, another person. I'm a long way from home, have been for quite some time.
I'm not really interested in what anything means for anyone. I'm just interested in the philosophical exploration of ideas.
Okay.
it's up to other people to take those ideas and to adapt them or throw them away, or if it's useful, it's useful. If it's not, it's not. But I'm really at heart someone who likes to grapple with philosophical questions of life, you know? I read philosophy more than anything else. I've studied philosophy. It's what I've done my academic work in. And I'm really interested in the ideas of how we navigate a liberal democratic philosophical idea with our own ideas and our own connections and our own belonging. That's why the High Court decision was a fantastic one, because it's a place where our belonging on our terms finds expression within a liberal democratic legal system. I think that's a really interesting idea for, you know, to pursue, where liberalism connects with our indigeneity. And you know, liberalism is the handmaiden of racism and colonisation, but it's also a liberating idea of freedom, and where do individual rights begin and end, and where do community rights begin and end. That negotiation, that tension is what we need to grapple with in Australia if we're going to have a political voice that is meaningful as Indigenous people. So I'm really interested in just exploring those ideas, and if people can take from that, you know, then that's good. But I'm not really interested in saying this is what you should do and how people should act, or it's up to other people to find their own journey.
Yeah.
But as a writer, part of that is to give people a story that can guide them in the same way that the great writers gave me stories that guided me.
You can do Nayania Baria, Nayania Manania, Manania. You can do Nayania Baria, Nayania Manania, Manania, Manania.